The latest polling out of New Hampshire shows two clear frontrunners. Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren lead the pack. Both candidates are in double digits, and Sanders is up 2 points from July. Warren is down 1.
But what really sets these two candidates apart? How are they on the same wavelength? Joining us via Skype to weigh in is editor of Current Affairs magazine, Nathan Robinson. Welcome, sir.
Hello, nice to be with you.
Hey, I want to get into the Bernie Warren thing, but first, for people who don't know Current Affairs magazine, I really enjoy the work that you all do. Just talk a little bit about the worldview and what you're up to.
Well, the worldview. Okay, so I mean, we're a leftist magazine. We're based in New Orleans. We're in print. We've been around since 2015, and you know, we're just I call us like the Bakunin to Jacobin's Marx. We're a little more we're socialists, but we're sort of libertarian socialists. We're a little quirkier. Our magazine is like a lot more like Mad Magazine than like Politico. Yeah. So we're kind of a mixture of serious analysis and satire. Right. From a kind of independent left perspective.
Bakunin to Marxism. Not only like 10 people will get that reference. But
Sanders got you.
So, Nathan, let's talk a little bit about the piece. You lay it out pretty stark terms. This is something that we've talked a lot about on the show, the differences between the two. What is it about an Elizabeth Warren that you say, quote, should be very worrying? What is it?
Well, I mean, the thing that I think is one of the most important lessons from the Obama years is that there's a huge difference between politics and policy, right? And so we think about candidates a lot in terms of their policies. What are they advocating? But there's a whole other half of it, which is really the question, how are you going to get it done? And I think with Barack Obama, the answer was there was no real theory of building a political movement that could pressure Democrats to get through the legislative agenda. And one of the things, so I wrote another piece about Elizabeth Warren earlier called, it was about law professors as presidents, looking at Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, who was also a law professor earlier in his career, and Elizabeth Warren. And law professors have this worldview where they like to look at the policy and they like to build the plans, right? They like to tinker with their wonks, right? They like to have all the rules perfect and all the plans perfect. But your plans mean nothing if they're not supported by a large-scale political movement. And I think this was one of the big failures of the Obama years. And I think it is something that is very worrying about Elizabeth Warren because she's so focused on the plans. Look at all my plans. And it's like, yeah, but it needs to be more than just you. This campaign can't be about getting you elected to office and then you'll fix it with all of your great plans. It has to be about what we can do together. And one of the things that I think is very reassuring about Bernie Sanders is he talks about this not me, us framework.
Yeah. Well, there was a very interesting moment with him in his interview with John Harwood at CNBC. I don't know if you caught it or not. But Harwood basically said, like, okay, so like, you know, Manchin in West Virginia, a very conservative Democrat. How are you going to get him on board with like Medicare for All and a Green New Deal? And Bernie said, look, you're damn right I'll be able to. I'm going to go to West Virginia with my like rallies and my crowds, and he's going to be under tremendous pressure to get this done. What did you make of that moment, and do you find that compelling?
That was one of the most reassuring things I've heard from Bernie Sanders, right? Because Bernie Sanders actually has a tendency to say nice things about his fellow Democrats, or he refrains from attacks on other Democrats. He's quite cautious, and I think understandably so. But at the end of the day, like if someone falls out of line, someone's not willing to get on board with Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, you have to be willing to support their primary challenger. You have to be willing to, you know, take the fight to them, even if they're in your party. And so hearing from Bernie Sanders that he was willing to do that is as I said, hey, reassuring, because that's so essential to the politics of how you get things done. You have to have a president who's willing to try and see what their power is and try to use that power. Otherwise, like, these plans are going to come to nothing. What happens is you go to Congress with your big Medicare for All plan. People say no. And then you say, oh, we didn't have the votes. And this is kind of when you read the Obama administration, when you read their memoirs that people in the administration have written, this is kind of what they say. They're like, well, you know, Joe Lieberman, he didn't want a public option, so we didn't get a public option. And you go, well, then why didn't you like destroy Joe Lieberman politically? That's what you have to do. That's how you gotta turn him around. You gotta figure out what does it take to get these people to turn around.
Yeah, well, also you had Rahm Emanuel running that process, and he didn't want healthcare at all, let alone a public option. So there's that as well.
Nathan, I do want to ask you though. So I get it, the whole, the political movement. I do think you're right, which is in the way that political power should be wielded is going after some of these people within their own districts. However, there still needs to be an element of kind of like technocratic know-how when it comes to actually implementing that. Now, I watched this happen with Trump, which is he basically had zero of this whenever he went into the White House, got wholly swallowed by the establishment. Where is the assurance, I guess, on the Bernie side that that something similar may not happen? Because look, just to staff the administration, you need a couple thousand people. The 1,000 people that have the resumes to even make it past the basic resume requirements, they all work in the think tanks here in D.C. It's basically captured already. So what is he going to do?
Well, it's a fascinating question, thinking what a Sanders administration would actually look like, because it's so unprecedented. Like, who would he even appoint to the cabinet? Like, when you have Noam Chomsky as Secretary of Defense, like, it's so like a radical departure. We did an article about like proposing like what a left cabinet might look like, and with some people who are very good. Because the good thing is that like these days, because you have a generation of radicalized young people, many of whom are super smart and do think about these things, you actually have the know-how is there. Right. I actually think Elizabeth Warren's kind of technocratic thing is a little overpraised. Right. If you actually look at these plans that she puts out, a lot of them are just like Medium posts that are just like describing a very theoretical, very vague plan. Now, I have no doubt she can get a bunch of Harvard Law students to sort of flesh it out. But also, like, Bernie Sanders, you gotta look at his website. It's pretty detailed. Like, the Bernie Sanders Green New Deal plan, pretty detailed. And when people say, oh, you haven't thought about ways to pay for Medicare for all, well, the Political Economy Research Institute and the People's Policy Project, both of them have put out detailed explanations of exactly how you could pay for Medicare for all. It's more that people don't want to listen to the explanations of how you get these things done than there's no one thinking about that.
There's something you said earlier I want to kind of pick up on. You talked about how Sanders is very, he doesn't like to attack fellow Democrats, right? He's a little bit deferential there. For the longest time in this campaign, anytime he got asked about Elizabeth Warren, it basically stopped at, she's a friend of mine, voters can make their choice. He has started, though, making a little bit more of a contrast. His campaign has started definitely making a little bit more of a contrast. And I actually talked about this yesterday. It seems to be showing up in the polls. So in this new New Hampshire poll done by CNN, the number of voters who saw him as the most progressive candidate of the field has really jumped up. So it seems to me like that contrast is working. I mean, do you think that that's the right strategy? Do you think he needs to be more aggressive in that regard?
I don't know about more aggressive. Sanders himself, as I say, kind of has to be careful because, if he's too critical, people are really gonna go after him for it. And I think it's good that he keeps generally to the positive. But at this stage in the campaign, it is very, very crucial that the distinctions between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders begin to be drawn. I understand that there was this instinct, and I had it myself, because we sense that like her fans and his fans are ultimately going to have to come together. They're ultimately going to have to be unified around one candidacy, so you want to be careful. But there was a thing that was happening where people would say, well, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are indistinguishable, therefore you might as well vote for Elizabeth Warren because she's younger and she's female. Well, you can't have that, because you really need to make sure, because these candidates are different. So at this point, Bernie Sanders really needs to start saying, no, I like Elizabeth Warren, but there are huge differences, and these differences matter. They're going to make a difference when one of us is in office over the other. So I think, and those of us who support Sanders need to start explaining very, very clearly that these candidates are not the same person, that we can predict that their presidencies would go very differently and that they would take very different approaches to governing.
Yeah, I think in a certain way the AOC endorsement and the squad endorsements made that case maybe better than anything else, because people, oh my God, why would she endorse not the woman? Right. And then you had to actually think about how these two candidates may be different and why you might choose Sanders over Warren. Hey, Nathan, if you drop that piece on a leftist cabinet, what that would look like, come back and talk to us about it. We'd love to have you back.
Oh, yeah. Well, we published it, So,
okay.
Oh, great.
It's not by me, but it's by someone who actually thought about this and went through all the candidates. So,
All right. Good deal.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you. Great to have you.
Thank you so much. Nice to talk to you.
Absolutely. Next on Rising, Argentina, Spain, China, Venezuela, and Haiti. Those are just some of the countries challenged by unrest across the globe.
Next, we talk to Michael Brooks, host of The Michael Brooks Show, and of course, friend of our show, about the troubles in Lebanon and Chile and how those countries are symbolic of a worldwide populist backlash when Rising continues.